And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a returning good brother into these hallowed halls. Coming back in for the first time in about 5 years, the head of Nerdburger Games, previously on here for things like Capers, and now back with Cosmic Corsairs, the one and only Craig Campbell. How you doing today, man?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I've had a lot of practice doing that intro.
Yeah.
But
I feel you. I know how that works. You know, I have my elevator pitches that I can do. For, you know, the longer I've had a game out, like, you know, the more experience I have with throwing out the elevator pitch and almost do it in my sleep.
Mm-hmm. So, with this particular project, Cosmic Corsairs, what is the origin story of it? Like, how did this idea come to be?
Well, it came through like a few different things kind of coming together. One was that you mentioned Capers, which is sort of the flagship game for Nerdburger Games,
Mm-hmm.
and Capers has seen, you know, multiple supplements and some adventures and things, and then we did kind of a Capers Cyberpunk. That's kind of the bookend game that is set 100 years after the original Capers. Kind of told the story of like this whole little kind of Capers universe from the 1920s up to the 2020s, and so that was coming to an end, and found myself thinking, like, Capers turned into a whole game line, although I didn't plan for it to be that. Like, when I did the Kickstarter, I was intending it to just be a game. But people started wondering and asking me during the Kickstarter if I was going to support it and, do supplements and so forth. And that's how all the other Caper stuff kind of came about. And so as this game line was ending, I was kind of like, well, let's see if I can come up with something that can become a game line and like actually plan for it from the get-go, like actually take a stab at like developing something with enough kind of pre-planning and forethought going into it so that I have a plan and a goal, and to do a game line that kind of services that. And so I bounced around a few ideas, and it, kind of bounced around genres, and with the debacles that took place through, regarding the D20 license and, the open gaming license and stuff, and all these other companies that decided to make their own fantasy game versions of things. And I was like, I don't want to do something fantasy because I don't want to have to fight against all of that. And now we see, like, those games are coming out now, right? That all kind of got started a couple of years ago. And, I hit kind of on like, well, what other genres are beloved by the gaming community, and I love sci-fi, so I thought I would dig down into sci-fi, and basically kind of hit on the idea and spent a good many months just kind of planning the idea behind it, which is you've got this solar system where there's a corrupt authoritarian government that kind of controls most of the 10 planets, and that'll be the backdrop for a series of games and products that'll kind of all interconnect with each other. And so there's each of the games in the planned game line is going to approach the idea of fighting back against this dark regime that kind of runs the show, but doing it in different ways. And Cosmic Corsairs is the first of that, where it's kind of the more straightforward, in your face. These are space pirates, people living on the fringes out in space, who are pushing back against the Triarchy. That's the regime that is in charge in the solar system called Aether Space. And so that's kind of where that began. And so there's other games and other things that are kind of planned down the road that are going to build on that, and approach other kind of sci-fi subgenres, but set within this solar system of Aether Space, and the trouble that it's the trials and tribulations that the people are going through under this, under the control of this, corrupt government.
Oh yeah. Now, with that in mind, since we're dealing with a universe that is going to have quite a wide range of possibilities. I'm kind of reminded of what Casey Hudson said about the Citadel and Mass Effect, but that's another story. I'd like to get a feel for what you would consider the Appendix N of this universe. Obviously, referencing Star Wars would be way too easy, so we'll avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as when you say Appendix N, you mean like what sorts of things inspired?
It can be inspired, or could be used as visual or thematic reference for people running campaigns in this using Cosmic Corsairs. Yeah,
it's well, I mean, there's certainly, it's easy to compare something like this to Star Wars because it's like, oh, evil empire and a rebellion. And so I've gone out of my way to like not use the word empire and not use the word rebellion. But people that's not going to fool anybody. People are going to look at this and be like, oh, this is kind of Star Wars-ish. And it's hard to avoid. And that's the case. That's something you run into with like any genre that is dominated by one or two or three kind of big IPs that kind of fit around
which is
particular themes, right?
Yeah, which is why I intentionally tried to avoid it.
Yeah. To that end, what I look to do is, first of all, to keep it kind of in one solar system. And while there's no faster than light travel, but there is very, very fast travel. This is one of those like we've seen the the space pirates versions of like where it basically looks like a sailing ship but in space, and people are people have cutlasses and maybe they have laser guns, and so it is that Aether Space has an atmosphere to it. The ships look like kind of science fiction stylized sailing ships, but not like too. I tried to avoid too many of them looking legitimately like, oh, that's clearly just a galleon that's been pulled up out of the water and thrown into space. So there's a science fiction kind of edge to everything, and so there are shades of certain things, certain aspects of Star Wars. Not, I tried to avoid, like, there's no laser swords. I stayed away from that. But there's spread across the various games, and you're gonna it'll slowly kind of introduce some other things as you go. Because the first game just kind of gives you what you need to do the space pirates thing. There's like what I tried to focus on was less like doing my version of science fiction property kind of tropes, or things that people would recognize right out of particular science fiction media, and more about like the things that kind of surround, in this case, for the purposes of Cosmic Corsairs, like the thematic things that surround these types of stories, which is looking at the nature and the evils of a government that's out of control. The idea of do the ends justify the means, fighting for the right thing, celebrating rare victories. It's easy for a science fiction where when you're battling against the bad guys, it's easy. You want to be like, oh, and then we fight here and we win, and we fight here and we win, and we fight there and we win. But it's less about like that, having continuous victories and just like celebrating the little victories or getting like the big rare victory. And having people that are, heroes that are flawed and people that are unlikely heroes. And then building on ideas of helping others and building community. Because it's not all about blowing up space station. It's also about helping the people who are directly oppressed and hurt by what's going on. And in the process, now you're creating allies, and they're willing to help you. And if you do enough, then eventually they may join the resistance as well. And there's actually mechanics in the game for tracking that sort of thing, with like you build up trust and hope amongst contacts and communities, and that gets you things. And eventually, like if you build enough hope in a community, they will join the resistance. They will, like as a group, they will actively start fighting.
Which I can get all of that, but I think we kind of got away from ourselves when it came to it. Since the big reason I brought up the Appendix N thing is drawing parallels. Parallels in terms of themes with other media. I know you want to avoid the Star Wars thing, but within the chat, there's been a few suggestions that I'd like to know if these ones would be closer to the mark. One of them was Treasure Planet. If you remember that movie.
I vaguely recall it.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically Treasure Island, but science fiction, as I recall.
Yeah. Another one that was brought up was Spelljammer, the little setting that could when it came to the TSR era.
I would say it probably it doesn't. Cosmic Corsairs doesn't really have, I don't think, anything, at least not the overt themes of Treasure Planet. Like the idea, first of all, the idea of like seeking treasure and like, seeking wealth. It's I write in the book, like it's like actually in the first chapter where it says like, gathering wealth and having the best starship aren't really the goal of the game, although that certainly having access to resources and having a really good starship can help, but ultimately the goal is to be fighting the triarchy. As far as Spelljammer, I would say that there is a certain part of there's a certain amount of Cosmic Corsairs that I think probably doesn't really borrow from Spelljammer, because we're not talking about crystal spheres and like kind of D&D-ifying the cosmos. It's more a little more traditional of a kind of solar system with planets and atmospheres, and there happens to be an atmosphere in space, right? So that people can be out on the deck on their ship. They don't have to be in space suits. They don't have to be inside the starship all the time. But there's I guess what was it called in Spelljammer, the phlogiston. Mm-hmm. That was your atmosphere. So yeah, I guess Cosmic Corsairs kind of falls in line with that a little bit.
Now, with that in mind, as I understand it, when it comes to the core mechanic, it is a D10 die pool where you're trying to get at least one dice to go over the target number.
Right, to hit the target number. Here, I'll throw this at you. Just like there is a little note in the game book before we get off that. I didn't want to completely evade the question, but there is a comment about inspiration. Mm-hmm. And so for this particular game, I think like the Expanse. There's elements of the game that kind of fit the Expanse. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, certainly with the in particular like the Dominion War kind of aspect of things. That portion of the Deep Space Nine run. I would hope that people put together, like crews that feel a little bit like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Like here's the mismatched group of ne'er-do-wells who are out to, they're kind of out for themselves, but ultimately they kind of find themselves helping other people and doing the right thing.
What about Firefly?
Certainly. There isn't a war that has been lost. Firefly was kind of set around the idea that there was this space civil war that the Browncoats lost, right? So there's not that. But when you're under the oppressive thumb of a authoritarian regime, there's certainly things that have been lost. Mm-hmm. There are terrible things that have happened. So you are operating kind of in the same headspace of like trying to deal with really bad stuff and certainly like with Firefly, it was all about living on the fringe, kind of out on they were Mal and the gang were trying to stay like out on the edges. They weren't traveling the core worlds too often, because it was very dangerous to do that, especially considering some of their crew members.
And I spoke
back to the system.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, like I said, that seemed, from what I saw, that seems to be the core mechanic that you are going with. Now, with just one die hitting counts as success. More than one is success with a boon.
Right.
And
so Yeah, you've got 4 traits: body, mind, charm, and heart, and you're going to roll. Those will be rated 1 to 4, and you'll roll a number of d10s equal to that number. And there's ways to increase and decrease that number, but that's your dice pool, and you're trying to hit 1 or more. Hopefully, if you can hit more than 1 success, because that gets you extra stuff.
Yeah. It also looks like skills are a case of you either got a skill or you don't. So what do skills impact on a roll if they're applicable?
If you have the appropriate skill, then that increases your die pool by 1. So it's less impactful to somebody who's already rolling 3 or 4, but it's very helpful to somebody who's only rolling 1 or 2 based on their trait.
Yeah, and I think one of the other big things is the track system that you have here.
Yep. The game uses a mechanic, or just an overall system that I developed called that I call the roll track system. It was developed for Good Strong Hands initially. And that version of the system was Annie nominated for best rules. And so that was a player-facing system. It was built to be entirely player-facing. The GM didn't roll any dice. For this version, it's player and GM facing, so both. Everybody's going to be rolling dice. So the GM will be. It'll be a little more traditional in the sense that the GM has, stat blocks for adversaries, and they'll be making rolls as well against the players. So when if you roll and you get no successes, you fail at the task at hand, and the GM introduces some sort of complication. So there's always something that it changes within the storyline. Like it isn't just missing. Okay, well now we move on. It's you miss and now something happens because of that. But you also mark on a track, which is just a series of check boxes called the reroll track. And if you fill up the reroll track, you clear that to gain a reroll that you can use on any trait check in the future. If you succeed with 1 die, you succeed at the thing you're doing, and you mark on the spirit track. And spirit is like a currency. You'll gain and spend points as you go. And spirit can be spent for a number of different things. And then if you succeed with 2 or more dice, you succeed with a boon, and a boon is, a quantifiable, it's like some extra benefit, some extra success, something better happens. But then you also mark on the Nova track. And when you fill the Nova track, you clear it to gain use of a Nova, which in the game, you're playing a character type that are called, you're a cosmic. That is, you've spent so much time in aether space, you've become attuned to the cosmic energies that kind of infuse all of the solar system and all of the celestial bodies up there, and you're able to channel energy from those celestial bodies. And so you have abilities that are called channelings, and the most powerful channelings are called novas. And so you build up to those by succeeding, with 2 or more successes on the dice, and then eventually you build up and now I have access to use a Nova at some point. So and those are significantly more powerful than the standard channelings.
All right, I can certainly get that. And when it comes to Nova, no, and just the extra normal effects on it. Is it a case where it's gradually escalating, or is there a benefit at the lower levels just as much to the higher levels of that track?
A Nova is a Nova. So once you have access to a particular Nova, it is what it is. You might be able to get better with it if the Nova involves making checks. If part of the Nova is actually making checks, because as you go along, you might be increasing your traits, or you're gaining a skill or whatever. So you could potentially increase that. But the mechanics of the Nova don't escalate based on your character advancement. Yeah. On like a level by level basis or something like that. A Nova is a Nova, And but as you advance your character, you gain access to more novas, so you gain versatility. It's less about gaining more and more powerful novas. It's more about gaining versatility of access to additional novas. And the same goes for channelings. Like, you know, you'll by the time you kind of max out in the character advancement, you may have 15 channelings that you have access to, with, you know, which gives you a great deal of versatility.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, given that one of the big things is if you get multiple successes, you get a boon. I am curious what the line would be. This isn't a hard and fast line kind of question, but more of a guideline where how the umbrella is kind of question regarding what would perfectly fit as a boon and what might push that boundary a bit much in terms of impact of a boon.
Sure, there's examples provided in the game, in the manuscript of the game, but it's ultimately kind of one of these. If you're familiar with Nerdburger Games stuff at all, you'll know that I tend not to get super prescriptive with, like, you know, here's a list of the things that you can gain, and these are the only things you can gain. Like, I don't generally do that. I give a list of ideas of things that you can incorporate. That are kind of in the quote-unquote power level of that benefit. And then, you know, players and GMs can kind of come up with their own additional ones. They can you know, discuss it and come to consensus on what kind of works for their group, right? So, you know, a boon on a social role might mean you learn even more. You were looking for a piece of information and you got that, but now you gain more information. You gain something that you maybe weren't looking for. That is suddenly useful information. And you know, if you're trying to solve a puzzle or kind of figure out how something might play out, like a boon might give you insight into how a particular path of action might go. You can do it mechanically. It can be as simple as gaining advantage on your next trait check, or causing adversaries that you're dealing with to suffer disadvantage on the next round against you, because you are suddenly, you know, you made a check to avoid getting hurt in something, you know, like getting out of the way of some area of effect kind of thing, and in the process you lured them in, and so they have to make a check to avoid getting hurt, or and they do it at disadvantage, or they're just dealing with disadvantage to shoot, you know, to attack you, because now their sight line is obscured because of how you know, what you did the previous round. So there's a lot of variation that can come out of that, as long as everybody as long as it's like, it feels like it's a tangible benefit, and it's not like cosmetic. It's not just like, oh, like, this is like, you look cool doing it. It's okay if you look cool doing it, but if that impresses somebody and it makes an NPC more likely to trust you or to provide you with information, now that's tangible.
All right. Now, one of the other things that I did see in the sample characters within the quick start is the concept of CPS, which I was a bit curious what that's going to entail.
It's in the quick start. It says CPS. It should be character. It's CP. It's CP's character. CP is character point. So it's a character. It's a point build system. Or you do effectively level. Like there's it's levels 1 through 10 for the characters, but they're not levels in terms of how some games use levels to, like, okay, now when you gain this level, you gain all these certain very specific benefits. Like, it's more a measure. It's more used to be just a relative measure of, like, well, you've got 5th level characters and you're dealing with 5th level adversaries, so those two groups have about the same amount of versatility and skill, and you know, they're relatively evenly matched, right? So you're gaining character points, and you'll be spending those character points on gaining channelings. You can spend them on gaining skills. You can spend them on gaining what are called species talents. So rather than every playable species having just like a set series of benefits, like if you play an Icrax, which is like an insectoid person, not every Icrax has the same Icraxian, talents, benefits. There's a series of them, and you pick the ones, like you start with 2 and you can gain more later if you choose to. So within a given species, there's variation of capability and cool species-specific abilities. So that's what the character points get spent on as you progress in level.
And having it be point-based does run the risk of analysis paralysis. That is something that can happen when you have a bunch of potential options. So is it a case where where there are certain checks when it comes to how much you can spend on certain things, or limitations on point spend, or is it open season at each level?
It's kind of open season, but you're only going to have so many points. You're not going to be like the best you could possibly do is gain 3 character points at a level. So the best you can do is gain 3 individual things that cost 1 point, which are going to all be relatively, they're cool. Here's a cool little thing you can do, but they're relatively speaking, they're weak compared to like a 2 or 3 point thing. So it's as you're building your character, there's a lot of options. So I think the system will speak to people who like having, who like the meta game of like planning their build, of like spending the time being like, okay, well, we just leveled up and I gained this, and this because that's what I decided I was going to do. And now like for the next level, like between now and whenever that happens, I'm going to start kind of looking at other things and be like, well, I don't have a cool defensive channeling, so let's see what defensive channelings there are available, or maybe I want to gain another one that's specific to my particular type of cosmic, because each cosmic has an affinity for one of 6 different celestial bodies, and so there are a series of channelings and novas that are specific to that particular affinity.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of like what you want to build your character. Like you want to have a combat monster. Well, you're probably not going to look at like, half or more of the channelings are out the window. Like I'm building, Captain Whoop-Ass. So I'm looking at attack channelings and defense channelings, and a few other things to kind of augment that. Maybe some movement kind of oriented ones that allow me to kind of keep, move around the fight.
Yeah, I could certainly see that. Now, obviously, since we're dealing with a space opera, I have to talk about ships. I am legally required to talk about ships.
Sure.
So, would it be fair of me to say that this is going to be a game where the ship is a character in and of itself? Complete with having its own sheet?
There will be a starship sheet available where you'll be able to track everything you need to track about your starship. So yeah, the ship has, there's a fair amount going on there. You've got a handful of stats that are going to be kind of geared toward starship combat, and then you've got just keeping track of all the other little stuff. Like if there's modifications you've done to the ship or what your cargo is right now. There's going to be a section on there for keeping track of crew, like if you've got other NPCs like crew members that are part of the game. You can kind of keep some information there. So yeah, there's a whole sheet that'll be that, and hopefully that'll give a great deal of flavor to the group, and to the party as being like you said, the ship becomes kind of a character unto itself, because it will have its own particular strengths and weaknesses. It might be particularly sturdy, and it might not be heavily armed, or vice versa. It might be very well armed and not be terribly sturdy.
Yeah.
Just depending on, how you kind of build it out as you progress the character, as you progress the story, and the players make their decisions about like what do they think is important for their starship to be.
Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that this is going to be a case where it's assumed in Starship Combat that you have the whole party acting as parts of this one ship.
Yeah. The way I approached it was to try to keep Starship Combat and personal combat to be something that happens more or less in the same kind of game mechanics frame. That is to say that you can have a personal combat, which is just people fighting people or monsters or whatever. You can have a Starship Combat where you're all just shooting, shipboard laser cannons at each other and maneuvering the ships. Or you can have both at the same time. Because you are in the position of having an atmosphere and characters being able to run around on deck and having ways to propel themselves to board other ships. So you could, have a couple of starships that aren't terribly far apart, and they're close enough that it's reasonable for at least some of the characters to potentially get across from one ship to the other, even to the extent of, since you are out in space, once you get kind of away from the atmospheric bubble of the ship and the gravity plane of the ship, like you could, if you did it right, you make the check, you could run off the edge of your ship and just jump. And you'll float across, and you might be a little bit easy to hit for a second while you're floating across to the other ship. But then there's also abilities that allow you to teleport, and there's, rocket pack kind of stuff, and grapple guns and things, and boarding ramps and all that sort of stuff. So you could find different ways to get from one ship to the other.
Yeah, and of course, I'm pretty sure someone will eventually come up with the idea of, hey, let's load torpedoes, let's fire torpedoes, but instead of explosives in the torpedoes, it's people, so they cut out the middleman on the boarding thing.
Launch a person, kit bash a torpedo launcher into firing a person across there. It's not specifically in the game, but I wouldn't poo-poo it at my table if they really wanted to do that. Find a way to propel somebody across there where it won't destroy them in the process.
Yeah, that's what the torpedo's for. It's to soften the blow so they don't get crushed. So they can go. So once they break into the thing, then they can start wrecking house. Now, in addition to that, you said that there isn't FTL travel, but ships can go fast. Based on what I saw on the quick start, it looks like travel between planets is, depending on circumstances, no more than a couple weeks in terms of days.
Yeah, it's days of travel. And it's one of those things that gets a little hairy because it's like, well, where is the planet in its orbit? Mm-hmm. And I'm not tracking things to that level, but there is a table in the book that describes the minimum and maximum travel time in days, assuming you have all the best conditions, right? Like the cosmic winds are blowing and your engine's working fine, right? And you're able to combine those to propel the ship very fast. And so the travel time, will be listed in a minimum to maximum. And so that gives the GM the opportunity to kind of, they can pay as much attention to the actual location of the planets in their orbits and how long it takes to travel there as they want, right? If they want to get really, get down nitty gritty and kind of have put down a hex map and draw on with pencil or whatever, and keep track of where the planets are and slowly, revolve them around the sun, that's fine. They can do that. But if they want to say, well, we need to go, you're at this planet and we need to go to, the story calls for us to travel for a few days so that you'll have a few days to do things on the ship, right? Like that's the story. We want you to have time on the ship. Well, then we'll place the next moment in the story at this particular planet or moon or space station or whatever, and that'll give us enough time. That'll, it'll make sense that you have time on the ship. as opposed to being like, if you were on the planet and now you're going up to a moon, that's going to be a relatively quick journey.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be like days worth of time for your characters to like, exact some repairs or install something or whatever cool, fun stuff they're doing on their ship as they're traveling around.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the winds earlier, and
I'm sorry. Oh, the cosmic. Yeah, the cosmic winds.
Yeah, and I think of that, and obviously I think of sailing currents and all that kind of thing. But I am curious if there are any potential hazards that could happen in travel, whether it be interference in cosmic winds or something else.
Yeah, there's several pages that go into exactly that sort of thing. There's things like, running into doldrums or eddies, rip currents, aether storms. Those are all kind of cosmic wind events. There's, star events that can be things like solar flares. In the game, there's something called a waning, where the sun dims for a period of time, and what that does to everything. And it gives you a bunch of ideas about like things you can do. It doesn't get super crunchy. Like you can take that and make these events and these phenomena as impactful as you want, or you can make them very impactful or make them just slightly impactful. I didn't want to get too dictatorial in how I described everything, but I give a lot of ideas. Like when you're at celestial bodies, it's like, well, what happens if the asteroid is unstable? Comets are their own thing, comets and meteors. What's it like traveling through planetary rings? All that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned aether storms. Is that analogous to, say, a maelstrom, where you should really, really stay the hell away from it unless you want to get dragged in?
Yeah, you should try to avoid aether storms if you can. Unless you're reasonably sure you can get through it very quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a hurricane.
And
hurricane/maelstrom. It's that sort of thing. It's a big roving pile of death. And like actually, the illustration in that section actually shows a ship getting its sails torn to tatters from an aether storm.
And because now in the real world, we have no shortage of superstitions from sailors or people who operate on ships. I'd say the most famous one is the whole breaking the bottle. So famous that there are special bottles made because of how people treat that particular thing. Oh,
right.
I'm not kidding either. There's bottles made of thinner sugar glass so that they'll break easy because if the bottle doesn't
Rather
break,
than
that's bad luck.
Damaging the ship. Yeah.
But within the book, are there certain nods to like in-universe superstitions that people who are traveling might have?
Not specifically, no, but it does have a little sidebar at one point where it gives everybody a little starship lingo to kind of remind you of some of the things that are kind of like basic sailing stuff that people may or may not know, like what's the difference between port and starboard, that sort of thing. But also there's what's the quarterdeck, what's pitch, what's the gunner's daughter. No, and that's and a lot of these are pulled right from actual real world. The gunner's daughter is a canon.
Yeah. I can
what it does talk about space legs instead of sea legs.
Yeah. Which leads me to, it's inevitable that somebody's going to try and make a space version of Long John Silver, or Blackbeard, or
sure
any other pirate. I personally,
and Bonnie, yeah.
I personally would lean more towards if we're gonna go that kind of ridiculous, let's go full in, and instead of just making Blackbeard in space, let's make Tortuga in space.
Sure. There are no shortage of pirate movies out there that people can draw upon for inspiration if they want to have a very piratey kind of campaign.
Yeah. I'm running
Absolutely.
I'm running 7th C at the moment, and one of the movies I used as a prep for my players was Master and Commander, which isn't pirate, but it's nautical enough that I'm willing to count it. And I picked that one just to hammer home the whole notion of life on a ship and the absolute hell that people are going through when sailing across the ocean.
Yeah, it was dangerous. It was super dangerous.
It was super dangerous and super long. You'd be out there for months on end, looking at nothing but ocean and all the other people who are stuck there with you, which is enough to make some people go a little bit batty. And even landlocked places where you're just stuck in one area with the same amount of people can make somebody go nuts. I have a friend who was in a base in Alaska, and because cabin fever could set in, there were signs everywhere saying your bunkmate is not plotting to get you. And then somebody in their infinite wisdom...
That's a handy reminder, yeah.
Then somebody in their infinite wisdom sent them a copy of the thing.
Wonderful.
Which I would have assumed was a prank. And in any other circumstance, I would have assumed that was a prank, but I decided to apply Hanlon's razor to it.
It's a prank, but it's a little mean.
It's kind of mean. It certainly is something that I would probably do as a dark joke, but I don't think it was done out of malice. I think somebody was just being stupid.
Yeah.
That is, of course, the whole thing with Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity.
Yep.
But I know you said that you weren't trying to go with laser swords or whatnot, but are you still going with some version of energy weapons? Like, are blasters still going to be a thing, or is it solid?
Oh, sure. There's
laser
pistols, laser rifles, all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's regular pistols and rifles too, but then there's the laser version of that sort of thing. It's sci-fi, so might as well have laser guns, and it looks great in illustrations.
Is it a case where solid slugs are looked at like antiques?
It's not really presented that way. No, they are comparable weapons. They're it's not like laser weapons are ridiculously more powerful than physical ammunition. But it's I wanted to leave it to players to just be able to flavor stuff, and if you go a little too hard with like, oh well, here's a slug slug thrower, and then here's a laser rifle, and the laser rifle is incredibly more useful and more powerful and more dangerous and more deadly than the slug thrower, then why would anybody take the slug thrower?
Yeah.
If they want to be able to kill the baddies, So I tried to keep things as comparable as possible, and so the big difference becomes more one-handed versus two-handed weapons, because it does tie up a hand, and that can be, that can actually have real consequences in your combat scenario if you suddenly are running around with a rifle and it's going to be awfully hard to climb anywhere.
Yeah.
Whereas you can probably climb at least some amount if you've got one hand free and your feet.
Yeah. Personally, I could envision it where there's a much simpler reason why energy weapons become more prevalent, and that is cost. Not saying energy weapons are cheaper, though they might be, but more of, if you're bringing in solid weapons, then that also means bringing in ammo. And that's adding to more weight. That's adding to the weight. And, weight and space is at a premium on a ship.
Yeah, not so much in my game. I'm not concerning myself too much with ammunition
and with encumbrance.
Like, carry a reasonable amount of gear.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put weights. I didn't attach weights to anything. That's never been something that I've particularly enjoyed about certain role-playing games or groups where they're like, well, you got to have your 5 feet of rope and your 10-foot pole, even though you may never use it for weeks on end. Yeah, be reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
As long as everybody's carrying reasonable gear, I'm fine.
Yeah. I've stretched it a few times, like having somebody carry a whole drum of ammo, but my counter with that was that they were carrying around a minigun. So of course they're gonna need a lot of ammo.
Sure.
No, it's not something where you're just gonna carry a couple clips here and there if you've got something that is eating up ammo like it's going out of style. Because he was meant to be the muscle of the group. His whole thing is sit down and suppressive fire.
Sure.
Also known as accuracy by volume, or I've got a bullet with your name on it, and I'm going to keep shooting until I find it.
Want.
But But given what was mentioned with the threats of, say, asteroids, is it a case where sometimes during traveling, if somebody's really unlucky, they might deal with showers in a sense?
Oh, asteroid showers. The whole idea of asteroids being close together, when in space they are not. They are typically very, very far apart. That's up to your cinematic eye. You want to have a chase scene or a scene where you're going to be hiding in amongst the many, many asteroids that are very close together. By all means, do it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. So yeah, asteroid showers. By all means, go for it.
Yeah. Now,
big asteroid fields.
Yeah. Unless I'm mistaken, it looks like you're going a more abstract theater of the mind approach when it comes to combat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I got that vibe just from looking at the ranges on the different weapons and how it's more about broad zones as opposed to set distance.
Yeah, it's not ranges are not measured in feet or yards. There's no expectation of gridded combat. It's more zones, which I'm sure you and listeners have run across in various other games where, like, for example, your starship might have on the top deck there might be 3 zones. There might be the fore, the mid, and the aft. And the furthest I go with that is to keep track of, you pay attention to whether or not you're adjacent to someone. So like when it comes to melee combat, you're both in the same zone and you're adjacent to each other.
Now, I know that a big part of Cosmic Corsairs is struggling against this government known as the Triarchy. But one thing I am curious if this is a case where any potential threat is them, or if there are minor, smaller scale threats that can be used just as well, to avoid the Moriarty problem.
Sure. It's in this game book, it is not specific. I don't specifically get into a bunch of other factions. Although you could certainly come up with those.
Yeah.
In the setting area, there's a number of different kind of organizations and factions that you could adapt into, like being offshoots that actually cause trouble for both sides.
Yeah.
But I didn't get too deep into that. I know that there's going to be a future game that is more focused on cells of resistance members who are trying to take down the government from within. So it's going to be like the more kind of subterfuge political sort of game. And I've got notes made for myself and started to brainstorm ideas too for other factions that are, like, here's this faction that's got some clout and they are anti-triarchy and they're trying, they're working against the triarchy, but they aren't necessarily in league with the other forces of good, like the resistance or the coalition that the government that preceded the triarchy. But that'll be more hit on kind of in the political arena, because I think that just for me personally, it felt like that was a better place to kind of seed that in there, because it is all about subterfuge, and so strength doesn't have to come in numbers; it can come in influence.
Yeah.
So you could have an offshoot group that isn't terribly populous, but that is very influential because of the power that they have or the context that they have.
Yeah.
So I'll be digging a little deeper into that. So, and I want I want the resistance to be able to, they need to be making deals with people that they don't know if they can trust.
Yeah. The parallel that came to mind for me is the way the Hutts are treated in Star Wars, in the sense that they're certainly not on the side of the Empire. They're only on the side of whoever is going to make them the most money. But they're certainly not the kind of people you want to have dealings with unless you have a lot of leverage.
Yeah. I didn't dig into that deeply for this particular game, but that does not mean that those organizations do not exist. And there's only so much information can be provided in a reasonably sized game book.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a game line, and I can kind of get into that more down the road. So, like, if somebody wants to take this faction that's developed for a more political game and say, oh, well, they also have, some influence up there in the shipping lanes with starships and their own, their own militia and so forth, then they can by all means do that.
Oh, yeah. Now, what are you shooting for as far as a page count for the book?
The core book clocks in at 148 pages.
Mm-hmm.
It's 7 by 10. It's a 7-inch by 10-inch book.
All right, so slightly smaller than a standard A4.
If you say so. I don't know all my A sheet sizes, but
A4
7 by
is
10. It's called executive size.
Yeah, A4 is 8.5 by 11.
Oh no, yeah. So yeah, it's not a full 8.5 by 11 book. It's a 7 by 10, so it's a little more compact.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the decision that I wanted to be able to do because of how I wanted to lay some certain things out. I wanted to be able to do 2-column layout, which doesn't really work very well at 6 by 9. The columns are too narrow. It looks weird. It reads weird. And 8.5 by 11 was too big, so I ended up going with 7 by 10, which allowed me to do certain things with stat blocks and things that kind of fit nicely.
So 7 by 10 is the Goldilocks measurement.
It is for the purposes of this game. It is not too big and not too small.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Just make sure not to overheat your porridge.
Well, yeah.
Who the hell has porridge these days?
No kidding. I had oatmeal this morning, but I don't know that I've ever had what you would legitimately call porridge.
I haven't since I was 8. Most of the time it was oatmeal. But with all that said, I know the Kickstarter has not launched yet. Do you have a launch date in mind?
Oh yeah, it's planned for October 7th. That's a Tuesday, and it'll run for a little over a month.
All right, and I'll have the link to the pre-launch, which will become the regular launch, in the description, of course.
Sure.
Now, you did mention trying to make essentially a universe with this cosmic setup.
Mm-hmm.
With that in mind, and I don't expect you to release this publicly, but do you have like an internal series Bible?
Absolutely. I have a whole document that kind of runs down. Here's the books that I'm planning. Here's what each one of them has in it. There's a whole bunch of ideas for different things that are in there. I looked at all sorts of different sci-fi tropes and thought, well, this would fit nicely in this particular game, and this would fit nicely in that game. This thing, I don't think it really fits thematically, into any of the games in a big way, but it could be like a little side supplement where I just put together a few different little things that are like not specifically thematic to a particular game, but they're fun little expansions of the world, you know, or of the solar system, I guess, more than the world. So yeah, there's a whole thing that got developed. I mean, I literally spent like nearly a year before I started designing anything. I spent like close to a year just brainstorming and laying out and figuring out, taking, you know, kind of getting a bunch of different ideas about how the mechanics might work, kind of, you know, figuring it out mathematically, you know, just like before the playtest, like we're just making sure the numbers all kind of made sense and like this should work okay, and then we can fine tune it, but then all the, you know, all the story kind of based stuff as well, all the thematic stuff, all the lore and everything. And there's a lot of stuff that's already kind of, at the very least, it's, you know, a bunch of bullet points. It hasn't necessarily been fleshed out, but it'll get there.
And I will certainly be keeping an eye out for how it develops. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way back to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens here.
Sure. I'm glad to come back. It's been too long. Just kind of, I bounced around on a lot of different podcasts, and there was a point where I hadn't been back to to this show for a while, and I was like, geez, how the hell did that go that long without me popping in here? So
yeah, I think the last time I had you on was for Good Strong Hands.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Oh. So it technically hasn't been 5 years, but it's been close.
It's been a while, yeah.
But anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Yeah, thank you.
And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Corsairs 上洛な情少年完成を